so young, caught up in the excitement of the city.
But underneath that youthful recklessness, she's searching for her identity.
And tragically drawn to a man who ultimately lets her down.
It's classic Morrison, taking these individual histories and weaving them into the city's own story.
And when we zoom out to the bigger picture, it highlights that theme of migration.
Welcome to Witter, Who Has Time to Read, the podcast that brings deep dives for busy minds. Listen to AI hosts Jane and Dane and get ready to unpack the world's most captivating books in just a fraction of the time. Whether commuting, working out, or just squeezing in a quick break, we deliver key insights, thought-provoking themes, and takeaways you can carry into your day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Plus, use our links in the description to purchase this book. Your support helps us bring more engaging book discussions to you. Listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Who has time to read? You do, with Witter.
Welcome back to Witter. You know the drill, deep dives for busy minds.
That's right. And you know what else?
What's that?
It's Black History Month, so we're celebrating with
Black voices.
Exactly. And today we're going deep.
Deep into jazz.
By the one and only Toni Morrison.
A novel as captivating and layered as its namesake music, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Jazz takes us straight to the heart of 1920s Harlem.
Oh, the roaring 20s.
A time and place bursting with creative energy, social change, you name it.
And, of course, that irresistible jazz music.
But Morrison takes us beyond the glitz and glamour. She plunges us into a story.
That's raw.
Unsettling, yet utterly mesmerizing.
I'd have to agree with that. And the book wastes no time pulling us in. It kicks off with a shocking act of violence.
Oh, yeah, talk about an opening.
Violet Trace, this middle-aged woman, disrupts a young woman's funeral with a knife.
Just like that, we're hooked. Who is this young woman?
And why such a visceral reaction?
As we read on, we discover the deceased is Dorcas, the young lover of
Violet's husband, Joe.
It's a love triangle gone very, very wrong. But Morrison doesn't stop there.
She weaves a tapestry of viewpoints.
Exactly. We experience Violet's grief and rage.
Feel Joe's guilt and longing.
And even hear Dorcas's own voice from beyond the grave.
It's almost like we're getting a 3D view of these events. Each perspective adds a whole new layer to the story.
It really makes you question everything you think you know.
And then there's this fascinating element. The unnamed narrator.
Ah, the voice of the city itself.
You know, it's like the city is another character, witnessing and commenting on everything that unfolds.
It is, like a Greek chorus.
But like way cooler.
Yeah. In those classic Greek tragedies, you'd have this group narrating, offering commentary. Well, here Morrison uses the city to add this whole other layer of depth and perspective.
I like the way you put that. It's not just setting the scene, it's an active participant in the drama.
Oh, for sure.
So we have this bustling city, these tangled relationships, and all these secrets simmering beneath the surface. But it's the way Morrison uses flashbacks to reveal the characters' pasts that really got to me.
Absolutely. It's not just gratuitous backstory. It's about how these experiences directly shape their present lives.
It's cause and effect, but on a deeply personal level.
Exactly. For example, we learn about Violet's traumatic childhood in the rural South.
Yeah, and how it created this fierce independence in her.
But also this deep-seated fear of motherhood.
Which, when you think about it, has major implications for her reaction to Joe's infidelity.
Totally. And then there's Joe.
With his rootless upbringing.
Always yearning for connection.
And for him, his love for Dorcas becomes this transformative, almost spiritual experience.
And it's also destructive.
It's both.
It's complicated.
And speaking of complicated, Dorcas. She's so young, caught up in the excitement of the city.
But underneath that youthful recklessness, she's searching for her identity.
And tragically drawn to a man who ultimately lets her down.
It's classic Morrison, taking these individual histories and weaving them into the city's own story.
And when we zoom out to the bigger picture, it highlights that theme of migration.
The city as this magnet, pulling people from every corner of America.
Each with their own hopes and dreams.
It's reminiscent of the Great Migration. Millions of Black people leaving the South.
Seeking better opportunities.
Escaping racial violence.
But it makes you think, is the city a promise or a trap?
It's a bit of both, isn't it? And speaking of the allure and danger of the city,
We can't forget the jazz music.
it's everywhere in this story. It's in the prose, in the rhythm of the sentences, in the characters' lives,
It's not just background music. It's like a heartbeat, a pulse.
reflecting the passions, anxieties, and freedoms of that era.
You're so right. It's almost a character itself.
I think it is. It becomes a metaphor for the complexities of life in Harlem during the Roaring '20s.
Seductive, intoxicating,
Unpredictable,
even dangerous.
just like the city itself. And speaking of the city's inhabitants, one of the most striking things about this novel is,
The portrayal of Black women.
oh, absolutely. They're so different, yet they share this strength and resilience.
It's powerful. Morrison captures the nuances of Black womanhood so beautifully. Violet, Dorcas, even Alice Manford Dorcas as an aunt, they all embody different aspects of this strength.
But they're also vulnerable, flawed, and incredibly human.
They defy those stereotypical representations of Black women we see all too often.
Exactly. And then there's how Morrison handles love and betrayal.
It's not black and white. It's a tangled web.
It's messy, complicated.
It makes you question whether anyone is truly innocent.
Can we really judge these characters? They're driven by love, jealousy, and this deep-seated pain, and their actions have devastating consequences.
One of the things that stuck with me long after reading Jazz was this recurring motif of violence.
Oh, yes. It's both physical and emotional. It's the scars, both visible and invisible, that these characters carry.
And it makes you wonder how much of this violence is rooted in the historical context, the systemic racism that permeates their lives.
It's a cycle that's hard to break. It speaks to the legacies of slavery and racism, how they cast a shadow on the lives of these characters, even in the supposed promised land of the North.
But let's talk about Morrison's writing itself. Her use of language, it's phenomenal.
It elevates this story way beyond a simple love triangle. It becomes poetic, profound.
She doesn't just tell a story. She paints a picture with words. It's not just what she says, but how she says it.
Absolutely. Her lyrical prose brings the story to life. Instead of telling us what characters feel, she puts us right there in their heads. We're experiencing their thoughts, their emotions as they happen.
It's like we're not just reading this story, we're living it.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, what does this all mean?
What does this deep dive into jazz reveal about the Black experience, not just back in the 1920s, but today?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is going to be different for each of us.
It will. But I think one thing is clear. Jazz gives us a glimpse into the richness, complexity, and resilience of Black life in America.
It's a story about love, loss, betrayal, and ultimately survival.
It reminds us of the power of Black voices to tell their own stories in their own words.
Which is something we should all be paying more attention to, not just during Black History Month, but all year round.
You said it. We often hear stories about the Black experience told by outsiders, but Morrison brings us right into the heart of the community. She shows us its beauty, its struggles, and its enduring spirit.
So as we wrap up part one of this deep dive into Toni Morrison's jazz, we'll leave you with some questions to ponder.
Ooh, yes. Questions are good.
What does this novel reveal about the lasting impact of slavery and racism?
How does Morrison's use of multiple narrators and flashbacks enhance the story?
And most importantly, how does this story connect with you? How does it deepen your understanding of the Black experience?
Stay tuned because, in part 2, we'll dive even deeper into the characters, the themes, and the historical context of this extraordinary novel. Welcome back to Witter,
where we're exploring the captivating world of Toni Morrison's jazz.
Picking up right where we left off, with the power of place and perspective.
You know, in part one, we talked about Morrison's vivid portrayal of 1920s Harlem. But one of the things that really stood out to me was how the city itself becomes almost like a character.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The city has this voice, this presence that's constantly observing and commenting on everything. It's like...
You keep saying it's like a Greek chorus.
It is, but cooler. Like in those classic Greek tragedies, you'd have this group narrating the events, offering commentary.
Right.
Well, in jazz, Morrison uses the city's voice in a similar way. It reflects on the characters' actions.
It offers insights into their motivations and the consequences of their choices.
Exactly. And it reminds us that the city itself is a witness to all the joy and pain that unfolds within its boundaries.
It's both seduced by the energy and possibilities of this burgeoning Black metropolis, but also wary of its darker undercurrents.
Precisely. It heightens that sense of excitement and danger that permeates the whole story.
And it's especially fascinating when we think about how the characters themselves relate to the city. They come to Harlem from all different places.
Each carrying their own hopes and burdens.
For Violet, who migrated from the rural South, the city represents freedom and opportunity.
A chance to escape the trauma of her past.
But it also brings challenges and anxiety she could never have imagined.
And then there's Joe. He embraces the city's rhythm, its energy.
He thrives in this environment.
It's where he finds love, even if it ultimately leads to heartbreak and tragedy.
It's like the city becomes a mirror, reflecting back the best and worst of these characters.
I think that's a great insight. It amplifies their desires, but also exposes their vulnerabilities.
And it's all tied to another key theme that Morrison explores, the idea of reinvention.
These characters are all trying to create new lives for themselves in the city.
They're running towards something.
But they're also haunted by their pasts.
It's like they're trying to outrun their own shadows. But those shadows just keep following them.
Exactly. And that tension, that push and pull between the past and the present, drives so much of the conflict in the story.
And this is where Morrison's use of flashbacks becomes so powerful. It's not just about filling in the backstory.
It's about showing how the past is always present, shaping the characters' choices and relationships in ways they don't even fully understand.
Like with Violet, we see how the violence and trauma she experienced as a young girl in the South shaped her worldview, her fear of vulnerability, even her relationships with other women.
It's heartbreaking to see how those early experiences continue to haunt her, even as she tries to build a new life in Harlem.
And then there's Joe. We learn about his rootless upbringing, his search for belonging.
And how he eventually finds a sense of connection through his love for Dorcas. But even that connection becomes twisted and destructive.
Partly because he's carrying so much unhealed pain from his past.
It's like Morrison is saying that the past is never truly past.
It lives within us, shaping who we are, even as we try to move forward.
Absolutely. And it's those unresolved traumas from the past that often lead to conflict in the present. We see it in Violet and Joe's marriage.
In their inability to truly trust and communicate with each other.
Which brings us to the novel's exploration of love and betrayal. It's not just about a love triangle.
It's about how these characters' past experiences, their unhealed wounds, make it difficult for them to form healthy, trusting relationships.
They're all looking for love.
But they're also afraid of it.
Yes, and that fear, that inability to let go of the past, leads to misunderstandings, jealousies.
And ultimately to violence.
But amidst all of this, Morrison gives us these incredible portraits of Black womanhood.
Violet, Dorcas, Alice Manfred.
They're all so different.
But they share this incredible strength and resilience, even as they navigate the complexities of love, loss, and betrayal in a society that often seeks to define and limit them.
Absolutely. She challenges those stereotypical representations of Black women we often see.
Violet is this strong, independent woman.
But she's also capable of great rage and violence.
Dorcas is young and impulsive, caught up in the excitement of the city.
But she's also searching for something deeper, something more meaningful.
And then there's Alice Manfred,
who initially seems like this rigid, moralistic figure.
But as we get to know her, we see her compassion, her deep love for Dorcas.
They're all flawed and complicated.
Which is what makes them feel so real, so relatable.
They're not saints. They're human beings trying to make their way in a world that doesn't always make it easy.
And it challenges us to think about the limitations that society often places on Black women.
How they're forced to navigate these expectations that can be both empowering and confining.
And then there's that ending. Talk about leaving us with more questions than answers.
Right. It's not a neat, tied up with a bow kind of ending.
It's ambiguous, thought-provoking.
And it leaves us pondering the question, what happens next for these characters? Have they truly learned from their mistakes?
Can they find a way to heal and move forward?
Well, listeners, we'll be unpacking that very question in part 3 of our deep dive into jazz. We'll explore those final open-ended chapters.
And discuss what Morrison might be saying about hope, redemption, and the enduring power of the human spirit.
Stick with us.
Welcome back to Witter,
for the final act of our deep dive into Toni Morrison's jazz.
Where we'll untangle that ending.
And figure out what it all means for us as readers.
Engaging with this powerful Black voice.
Exactly.
In part 2, we were talking about how the characters' pasts keep shaping their present.
How their desires and traumas play out against the backdrop of this vibrant but often unforgiving city.
And we left off with that ending, which, well...
it's ambiguous, right?
It doesn't exactly wrap things up in a neat little bow.
It certainly doesn't, and that's part of what makes it so thought-provoking. Instead of giving us easy answers, Morrison leaves us with these lingering questions.
Questions about forgiveness.
Reconciliation.
And the possibility of healing.
It's like she's inviting us to think about what happens after the story ends. How these characters might move forward from all the pain and heartbreak they've experienced.
So walk us through those final chapters. What happens after all this heartache and violence? Do they find any kind of resolution?
Well, we see them trying to piece their lives back together, but it's a slow process. It's difficult. Violet, after confronting her own jealousy and rage, starts to open herself up to the possibility of connection. It's subtle, but we see a shift in her. She starts reaching out to others, offering care and support.
I loved that scene with the wounded bird. It's like she's finally learning to nurture something outside of herself.
It is such a powerful image, and it speaks volumes about her capacity for empathy, for compassion. Even after all she's been through, she's still capable of growth, of change.
So what about Joe? Is he able to move on from Dorcas's death?
He's trying. He's grappling with the guilt and the grief. He gets lost in his memories, retracing his steps, trying to make sense of what happened.
It's like he's searching for something, some kind of answer or absolution.
Yeah. And then there's Felice, Dorcas's friend,
who is also dealing with her loss in her own way.
She's young, but she has this wisdom.
Beyond her years.
And she becomes this catalyst for change in Violet and Joe's relationship. She doesn't judge. She just encourages them to talk, to confront their pain, to find a way to move forward.
It's like she represents a new generation, one that's less burdened by the weight of the past.
And she brings a fresh perspective. Even the city seems different in those final chapters, don't you think?
Now that you mention it, it does. It's still bustling, still full of life. But there's also this sense of peace, of acceptance. It's like the city itself has undergone a transformation.
It has. It's learned to live with its shadows, with its history. And I think that sense of acceptance extends to the characters, too.
It's not that they've forgotten the past, but they learn to live with it, to find a way to move forward without letting it define them.
And it all leads up to that last scene, Violet and Joe lying in bed together, the city lights twinkling outside their window.
A quiet moment, an intimate moment. It's hopeful.
After all the chaos, it's a breath of fresh air.
It's not a fairy tale ending.
Yeah.
But it does suggest that maybe, just maybe, they can find some measure of peace.
Some sense of connection, even in the face of tragedy.
Which brings us back to that question. What does jazz reveal about the Black experience? Not just in the 1920s, but today.
It's a testament to resilience. It's about the human spirit's ability to endure, even in the face of unimaginable hardship. And while jazz is set in a specific time and place, its themes are timeless.
Love.
Loss.
Betrayal.
And ultimately, survival.
Those resonate across generations.
They do. And jazz also reminds us of the complexities of the Black experience in America, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and struggles. And it highlights the power of these stories, giving a voice to those who have been marginalized and silenced.
Jazz is a book that stays with you. It challenges you, moves you. And it reminds us that this is just one story, one perspective.
Within this vast and diverse landscape of Black literature,
so many other voices are waiting to be heard.
Seek them out. Explore. Discover authors like James Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston, Richard Wright. Keep the conversation going.
That's it for our deep dive into Toni Morrison's jazz.
Until next time, keep reading.
And remember, even when you're busy, there's always time to expand your mind.
Thanks for listening to Witter, Who Has Time to Read, produced by One Media. Please support the author by purchasing the book or audiobook using the link in the description. It's a great way to help keep the art of writing alive. And stay in the loop. Subscribe to our newsletter for updates on weekly deep dives. And don't forget to share your thoughts or suggest our next deep dive at witterpodcast@gmail.com.